Let's talk about life. Let's have a little conversation. Let's talk about life. Get a little information. Let's talk about life. Let's talk about life.
Good morning. This is Beverly Hurdy, broadcasting from beautiful St. Petersburg, Florida. I'm very, very excited about today's show. As many of you know, we've been doing a series on addictions. And as I'm pursuing this series, I'm discovering so many types of addictions. We thought we'd take a break from the classical addictions, drugs, alcohol, etc., opiates, because that's been our thrust for the last 5-6 shows. And we're shifting into something that's a little, maybe more subtle and trickier, but certainly is dangerous, and that's sugar addiction. So we're going to be talking about sugar addiction today. It's going to be a very interesting show. I learned a lot researching it. I think you'll learn a lot hearing some of the research. I've got guests that will help, explain things. And first I want to thank my sponsors. So I'm going to talk about UPS at 2nd and 2nd South, because UPS is just this wonderful full-service UPS store. They have printing services, binding, laminating, packing, and shipping, as many of you know. Mailboxes with a real street address. Notary public services, moving, packing, etc., etc. The big news is they are now open on Sunday. So they're open 7 days a week. And it's not too late to start thinking about shipping for, any occasion. We've got so many occasions coming up. Personally, I've started shipping I'll be going to Chicago. I've gotten the habit now of shipping. If it's a long trip, I ship my stuff ahead, and I don't have so many suitcases on the airplane. So there's a lot of reasons to use their services. Many of you people know who they are. UPS at 2nd and 2nd South in St. Petersburg, Florida. Okay, I'm also going to now share you a little bit about the show, because I've got a lot of new listeners, and one of them texted me and says, Velva, I know your show is called Let's Talk Life, but, what does that mean? Because we've been focusing so much on addictions, picking up a lot of listeners. But so I wanted to give you a little overview of the show. First of all, we broadcast weekly. It's an internet show. You can download it once the broadcast is over and it goes live, it goes on the air. You can download it onto your desktop if you wish. I've been on the air since January of 2014. So that's a long time. We have podcasts. We're on platforms. We're on iTunes and Spreaker and SoundCloud. At the height of the show, the average listening audience was 22,000. And I've got statistics to back that up. A lot of people don't believe that, but I've got statistics to back that up. I took a hiatus, so it's not that high anymore, but it's climbing back up there. Now, what's nice about the show, too, is you can download it. So the statistics now are not just about listening at 10 o'clock Saturday morning, but it's also about how many downloads a lot of people aren't even around on Saturday morning. They're out about the markets and places like that. We're dedicated to healing and personal growth. And we focus on the 8 primary life areas, and that's the heart and soul of the show. And the 8 primary life areas are self, family, relationships, community, health, spirituality, work, and play. And in our lives, in the human condition, those are the 8 primary areas that we all function in. Some more, some less. Some people only function very well in one, and some in all. It just depends on who you are and what your life story is. So I've been a clinical social worker for 30 years. Now it's more. And I've interviewed and practiced for primarily addictions, and then I shifted to dreams. So I'm a pretty all-around service provider, as they call it, clinical service provider. So we're going to take a break, and then we're going to get on with the show. Okay, we're back. The first thing I'd like to do is talk to you a little bit about the upside and the downside of sugar. Sugar, we all love it. We all eat it. It's everywhere. We can't avoid it. But there's a downside. There's a very clear downside. And I also, in my research, discovered the difference between refined sugar and raw sugar, all these different kinds of sugars, and also in the history of sugar. It was very interesting to learn that sugar in its purest form is not so bad. It's that when it came from India and worked its way through Europe to the Caribbean, and it suddenly to our country, it became contaminated with a great amount of other chemicals. So sugar became much more as the industrial world got its hands on it. And I think that's really important to take in, because sugar per se is like everything else in its purest form. It's not so bad. It's meant to be. It's natural. But once industry gets their hands on something, they corrupt it. So sugar has been corrupted, and the kinds of sugar we're eating here in this country has been corrupted. So I'm going to have my guest talk more about that, but that's important for you to bear in mind. So what's the downside of the sugars that we eat in this country? Not the sugars in their purest form. First of all, there's 10 downsides. One of them is you can get type 2 diabetes. The second one is it adds to depression. Believe it or not, people have ice cream or something wonderful because they're depressed, and all it does is contribute depression because there's a biochemical element that we're not paying attention to. The third thing, sugar increases fat storage. Now remember, this is all going on inside of your body. We're talking about table sugar, high fructose corn sugar, which you should never ever put in your mouth, ever. And you start reading labels and you'll be shocked at how many products in the marketplace have high fructose corn sugar. Shocked. I was shocked. Sugar causes wrinkles. I didn't like that. It's because it breaks down the protein fibers. And remember, it's interacting with your body chemistry. It breaks down the protein fibers, and those are the things that help your skin stay firm. So if you have enough of that in your system, your skin is going to sag because the protein fibers are not functioning at their top level. Sugar raises cholesterol. It raises the risk of heart disease. Sugar makes you overeat. It doesn't make you do anything, but what happens is when you're full of sugar, false signals are sent to your brain. And those false signals indicate that you're still hungry, and you're not. It restricts blood vessels. It zaps your energy. You might have a sugar rush, but ultimately, we all know about the sugar crash too. And number 10, and the author put this at 10, which I would put it at 1 personally, is that sugar is extremely addictive. We know that illegal drugs, heroin and cocaine and opiates and even legal substances, cigarettes and alcohol, etc., are highly addictive because the substances within trigger the production of chemicals that cause craving. There's another element I've talked about ad nauseum called cellular adaptation, which is part of the whole alcohol and drug syndrome. But sugar does the same thing. In this case, targets the brain pleasure center, triggers dopamine releases, and eventually, because of cellular adaptation, we start to crave sugar. I found out there's a fat addiction, and I may talk about that someday, but not today. So it's tougher to achieve because when you increase your sugar intake, you're triggering that addiction. And it's just like any other addiction. Your body gets used to it, it craves it, it wants it, and it demands it. And so you feed that demand. And that's what addiction is. It's feeding on demand from your body. So I know there's psychological addictions, but we're talking about biochemistry here. So those are the 10 things that you have to worry about. If you want to worry about something else, I know we're all worried about something. Now it talks about, I said, okay, what's good about sugar? Why? That's the downside. The upside, there's all these articles urging you to switch to brown sugar because brown sugar has molasses in it. And molasses have some nutritional value. So there's more flavor, more textures. Brown sugar actually protects your skin, according to this article. And it has a calorie content. It's a benefit to you. It's closer to its natural state. And they also talk about honey, all these wonderful things that are part of nature. But sugar is on this earth for a reason. And we should appreciate it and understand it and stay away from the sugars that are chemically manipulated. And, respect what our body wants and needs without letting your body dictate what you put in your mouth, which is what addictions are. So those are my feedback, my little foundation. I'm going to have Emmanuel, when he speaks later, Emmanuel Roux is one of my guests, and Patricia Noll. And later, I'm going to ask him to talk a little bit about the history of sugar. But right now, we're going to take a quick break. Then we're going to come back, and you will meet Pat Noll, who's an addictions expert. She works for the court system. She's written a book on addictions, and she's a friend. We'll be right back. Okay, here's Pat Noll. Hi, Pat.
Hi, Velva. So fun to be here.
I'm glad you're here.
Thank you. And what an interesting topic, sugar.
Sugar, we all love it.
I know, it's one of my favorites. I could call myself a sugar addict.
Well, I almost could. But I got a scare years ago, and I did a lot of changes, and one of them was I let go of refined sugar, and I never touch it. But talk about what you do, and I understand you have some clients that are addicted to sugar.
Yes, as you mentioned, I have a drug and alcohol treatment program that I founded in 1989, so it's been around a long time.
Yes.
I've worked with thousands of people over the years, and what is interesting about sugar is that when people come to me to begin with, we're talking about an alcohol addiction. And what I have found in my research and in my studies is that the alcohol is almost always the byproduct, if you will, of a different addiction, which is sugar.
Okay, talk about that.
So we start with the sugar addiction, and there's some interesting information that's available. A lot of books written about it years ago, just years and years ago, like in the 1940s and the 1930s. And one of them that I particularly like is called Sugar, the Hidden Addiction. And so we start out with this addiction to sugar, oftentimes as tiny babies. What do mothers often give their babies to quiet them down if they're really cranky and fussy?
Sugar water.
You got it, sugar water. And years ago it used to be the Carol syrup, the corn syrup, which you mentioned as well in the water. So yes, the sugar water. So
I've got to do a cautionary tale here. If any moms are listening, do not give your infant honey. Do not. Just don't. I don't want to tell you why right now. It's too long. But you can do it later. But if you're thinking, oh, honey, no.
Don't switch to honey.
Don't
That's
switch to
right.
honey.
That's good
Okay.
info. Yes, for a lot of reasons. So with the sugar being the hidden addiction, so what happens, and I have to say this is my personal story. As a young adolescent, I loved nothing more than powdered sugar donuts and ice cream at the corner store and things like that. And so I was overweight when I was in elementary and high school, and finally I did something about that. And the thing that I didn't know at the time is I stopped eating sugar. And
Okay.
I lost the weight. And however, later in life, when I found alcohol, it was like, woohoo, this is awesome. It then triggered what would have been my lying dormant sugar addiction.
Let me ask a question here.
Yes.
Most everybody starts their drinking at 10 now. When I started my practice, it was 12. Now it's down to 10.
It used to be 9. I've seen some,
Okay.
so 9 or 10.
I mean, the average.
Sure.
So you weren't interested in alcohol
I
until
wasn't.
later. How old were you when you?
I was actually in my 20s.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
In my 20s. And how did it start? It started because I wanted to fit in and belong with a group of people that I worked with. And I wanted to look good and be one of them. It tasted horrible.
Well, that's how everybody starts. They want to fit in.
You got it. You got it.
Yeah.
You
Nobody
got
starts by saying, hey, I think I'll become an alcoholic. No,
Right.
no.
You are so right. And so I started with the alcohol, and that just continued. And now I haven't drank for 30 years.
Okay.
However, because I drank my share and more when I did drink. However, I've worked with thousands of people in that 30 years, and what I find, and what happened to me as well, was that once we stop drinking the alcohol because it's causing a problem of some kind, maybe legally or financially or with relationships personally, whatever. So we stop the alcohol, and then what are we looking for? We would walk a mile for ice cream, a candy bar, anything that's sweet.
The AA community in Chicago, they had ice cream socials all the time.
Yes. And even now, when you go to an AA meeting, there are always the bowls of candy, oftentimes the coffee and donuts, because why? The body is clamoring for sugar. It says, wait a minute, something's missing. I still need my sugar. And alcohol is just sugar.
Okay, but, and I hear you.
Okay.
But I think that what I'm trying to drive home is that sugar in and of itself is not the problem. It's how it's manufactured and all the additives and everything. Like mead, let's go way back. The history of alcohol started with mead. But the point is, none of this was a particularly bad thing. And somehow it became, and if we could get back to some, I don't know, more pure forms of things, or I know about cellular, I know about addiction, I understand completely what you're talking about. But I don't want to legitimize sugar, but let's face it, that ice cream cone is full of additives.
It is, Velva, and I really want to respect your point about what we've done to sugar over the years.
Okay.
Yes. We have so modified it and refined it. We've done it with sugar. We've done it with flour. We do it with salt. Those have been defined as the 3 white deaths. Refined white sugar, refined white flour, refined white, the salt that we we use today, right? So if we could get back to the natural, and then, just to mention, just an aside here, we've even gone further, and then we've introduced all kinds of new sugars, aspartame.
But they're all chemicals.
They're
just
all chemicals. You've got it. And so the body doesn't do well with those at all.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I just want to make a point here, too. I'm not going to go mill my own flour. All right. I switched to brown sugar. I haven't had refined sugar in a long time, unless maybe at a restaurant for dessert or something. I've done everything I could, but there's some things that I can't do. So how do you get flour that isn't a death flour?
Yes, go to our local health food stores that we have. Anywhere in the area, they're going to have healthier flours. They may be made from different grains. They aren't as refined. What we've done is and you mentioned it, it's the refining process. In the refining process, we take out the nutrients. And so then what does the body do? It clamors for more. And I know that the next guest is going to know way more about this than I do. However, they don't have nutrients in them.
Well, this is about shelf life. This is ultimately about money. Mm-hmm. The whole thing is about money. Matter of fact, It traveled from its sources into the Caribbean, into this country, because of money. Somebody was profiting from it.
Right.
So, and they found the more they manipulated it, the longer it would last, and those kinds of things. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to, I'm loving what you're sharing.
Thank you. In some of my research, I found that a lot of things in our country especially changed during the Second World War. Mom and Pop left the farm, and Pop went overseas to war, and Mom went into the factories to help produce. But during that time, we also had a food shortage because Mom and Pop weren't raising food anymore on the farm. So we had some really genius entrepreneurs that said, wow, here's our opportunity to work with food. And they learned how to create food products that were inexpensive, very low on nutrition, but however they would fill us up.
Okay.
And so that was a big time in history that changed our view and the way that we use and manufacture food. And I don't know, I don't know whether I want to mention this or not, but I think in the food marketing area, I think that they're still very good entrepreneurs because they know what we're addicted to.
Yeah, they feed the addiction.
And so they feed us.
Yeah. Well, listen.
And so that's good marketing for them.
Speak your truth.
And
Speak your truth.
It is my truth. And so we have to become educated, self-educated. And that's why I love what you're doing today, especially with sugar, because sugar kills. My mother died from diabetes. And that's okay. It's been a lot of years ago, and she taught me a lesson, and I thank her for that. However, what I see every day is
give us an example
sugar.
of it.
I will. This is so interesting because we were talking about this a week ago, and just last week I had someone in my office, a young lady who hasn't been drinking for a few months now, several months. And what she started to tell me, I said, well, how are you doing otherwise? She says, oh my gosh, she says, I am eating candy. And I said, really? Okay, well, tell me about that. And she said that her boyfriend told her, do you know that you are hiding your candy just the way you hid your alcohol? Whoa. And she had to look at that. She would get up in the middle of the night and go find where she had stashed her candy and have some candy in the middle of the night and sneak back into bed. Just the same habit with the candy that she had with the drinking. And
I tell you, right? my scare was like that. I was addicted to Pepsi.
Yes.
And I wanted a Pepsi so bad that I actually left the house, keys in hand, got in the car, and sat there and realizing I was leaving my children alone so I could go buy Pepsi-Cola. Now, that sounds so ludicrous when I say it. It almost sounds like a bad joke. And I sat there in the car and I said, what the F am I doing?
Right.
get out of this car, go back in and that was the end. That was my wake-up call. When I realized I was going to actually drive away and leave my kids on it. They were asleep, but still they were home.
They're right.
So I could buy a Pepsi at a
Absolutely.
nearby, the only place open they had
convenience
machine.
store or
No, gas station. It was a gas
okay.
station. They didn't have convenience stores back then. But the point I'm trying to make is you get that wake-up call.
Yes.
And that was it for me.
Yes.
That was it for me.
And that was her wake-up call when she was confronted with, do you know you're doing the same thing with candy as you were doing with your alcohol? And she said, oh my gosh, I had to look at that and say, you're right. I am. And she was just doing it without even paying attention to it. I had another lady that would go to the grocery store, buy the groceries for the week for the family, and part of the groceries was a half gallon of ice cream. Mm-hmm. She would drive home, and she knew that ice cream was in that grocery bag all the way home. And she would get in the driveway, and before she would go in the house with her bags of groceries, she, with her fingers, with her hand as a scoop, would start scooping out the ice cream and eating that, all of that ice cream, that half a gallon of ice cream, before she would go inside and get rid of the carton, and then she'd unload her groceries.
For God's sake.
Mm-hmm.
For God's sake.
Yeah. I mean, we don't think that we would let something like sugar control us that much, do we? And yet
not ordinarily, no.
No.
But this is about raising awareness. Mm-hmm. And you've been an amazing guest, Pat. This is just really, really interesting. And I like the story about the 3 deaths. I've got not today, but I've got a story about the 3 coats, about levels of alcoholism that's pretty interesting. But 3 is a magic number. And I think there's a reason information is disseminated in 3s because it has a little karmic element to it, if I may say. So we're going to take a quick break. I'm going to introduce my next guest. At the end of the show, I want you to talk about your book.
Okay, I'd be glad to.
This has just been great. And I'm very excited that you've shared and that we're all going to get on the same page around this.
Good.
Okay.
Good. I'm glad I can help in any way. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Hi, I'm back. We're all back. We're sitting here talking about sugar and food and all kinds of stuff. So here we are. I'm going to introduce Chef Emmanuel Roux, who I have known for many years. He's one of the first friends I made in St. Pete. I want to share right now that Chef, all the art shows I've ever done, any effort I undertook, he was right there supporting me, donating his fabulous flourless chocolate cake. So he's been a great supporter and a good friend, and he's very much the heart and soul of, I don't want to say the old St. Pete, that's not putting it that way, but his roots go back a great deal, and we'll find out how. He was born and raised in Tunisia on a farm, so he's been technically a farm boy all his life, and he continues to be very active in farming. His parents were French, they owned the farm, and so his childhood is very much hands in soil. And he's made it his mission in life that I've known him, that to know everything there is to know about any product he ever decides to put on the table. And I laughed when he described the names of the hens that laid the eggs that were in the flourless chocolate cake. So that's how much detail he goes into. Everything's totally natural, organic, good for you. I could eat the whole cake, but actually I can't, because it's the kind of a cake that just satisfies you with one decent piece, okay? Not the whole cake. He's going to talk about healthy soil, healthy food, and healthy people. He came to St. Pete in 93. He's owned a number of restaurants here. I didn't know it at the time, but when I moved here, I ate in one of them. It's been a life, food, health, wellness has been a life passion based on his history and in European history And now we're all seeing the differences between European food and American food, and everybody's cringing. So he's way on the front edge of this curve. I'm going to let him share what else he needs to share. I'm talking enough. I want you to introduce, and he's going to talk a little bit. He's going to build on what Pat and I have been talking about. So welcome, Emmanuel. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Bella. It's a pleasure to be with you. And always, we've done that, 3 times now? Or 4 times?
3. This is our third.
Third time.
Well, you always have so many interesting things to say. You're a good guest.
Well, I think that an important part of life is pleasure. And
How French of you.
sugar is a source of pleasure.
Yes.
Too much sugar is an addiction. And unfortunately, in today's food industry, because sugar is addictive, processors put sugar in almost everything. If you look at the label of bread, of dressing, salad dressing, there is sugar in it. That's why I never buy any of those. I only I make my own salad dressing, and I eliminate all the sugar. I never drink a Coca-Cola or a soft drink, and I think that there is ways of eliminating sugar when you know where it is hiding. And the more you cook at home, the easier it is to control this. But I think that in order to understand why we're addicted to it, we have to look at the history. And our ancestors, and I'm talking about 200,000-300,000 years ago, needed to get some quick calories, and the way to find it was to get honey. So to get honey, you have to climb up a tree and take the honey from the bees, and the bees usually don't like that. Therefore, sugar and sweets for hundreds of thousands of years has been a real treat, and an expensive treat, not in terms of money because there was no money, but in terms of bee stings. And therefore, when it was good to have a friend who was courageous enough to go and fight the bees to get the honey, and then if you had been nice to him or her, you had a chance of getting a piece of comb of honey. Therefore, for hundreds of thousands of years, our brain has been wired to enjoy sweets. And until a couple hundred years ago, sugar was a very rare thing. Sugar was extremely expensive because it had to come, I'm talking about in Europe. Sugar is essentially a tropical product. It requires a lot of heat, it requires a lot of water, and a very fertile soil. And the sugar cane does not grow in temperate climates. So the only sugar that was coming to Europe either had to come by sailboats or caravans, and it really was a luxury item. Honey was less expensive, and then people started to figure out how to work with bees. So now, starting 200 years ago, sugar, the price of sugar has come down considerably because there were bigger boats, because there were bigger plantations of sugarcane, primarily in the Caribbean and essentially in Cuba. and the sugar became a commodity. Over the years, people figured out how to evaporate the water from the sugarcane juice and concentrate it and lower the cost. Nowadays, sugar is one of the cheapest commodity that cane or beet sugars, essentially beet sugar, and the worst of all, corn syrup is the worst of all. And it is a very, very inexpensive thing and plentiful. But you have to remember that our brain is hardwired to enjoy sugar, and it takes an effort to limit our intake. So a little bit is okay, and there are different sugars that are more or less refined. Coconut sugar is becoming popular. There are and good cane sugar that is not brown sugar, that is little refined, is also good because it has all kinds of other trace nutrients that are necessary.
Where do you find good cane sugar?
Florida produces a lot of organic cane sugar that is not refined, and I buy. That's the only cane sugar that I use.
Where do you buy it, though?
Health food stores, Rolling Oats.
Okay.
And Trader Joe has it also.
Okay, good to know, everybody, because I've been buying brown sugar, but if I could find good cane sugar, I could get excited about that. Actually, I want to talk a little bit about chocolate too, because when we have an addiction, I think that's the first thing I think about. But anyway, so sugar has made its way from the source of.
Sugar, the first sweetener, the first sweet that humankind used was honey.
Okay.
And then it was the sugar cane that was grown in India and in Asia, and that those sugar canes were moved to the Caribbean and Cuba in particular, and there were some big plantations of sugar canes.
I want to ask
there.
a question
And
right
Florida.
now. Pardon, I just wanted to, somewhere in the back of my head, I did a history on mead. Now, somewhere in the back of my head, is mead and honey related?
Yes.
Can you talk about that?
Yes. Mead is fermented honey.
Okay, so because that's the beginning of beer.
Yes,
Okay.
it is. Well, beer is it is related to beer, but it is not. Beer is made by fermenting grains and malt. Mead is made by fermenting honey, and you add water to it, and the natural yeast get mixed with it and turns the sugar into alcohol.
Thank you, because I knew there was a connection. So
Yeah.
there we go.
And I love mead, but I have some very painful memories of a flight on British Airways where I drank a little too much and I was sick like a dog for 2 days. So enjoy mead like sugar in moderation.
So we're all telling our little intervention stories, or self-interventions, or lessons learned the hard way, I call them. So talk a little bit, Emmanuel, about how you this sustainable farming and how you're morphing in, the journey you've taken since you've come to St. Pete, how much it has to do with farming. I understand that you're going to have some new ventures down the road. What kind of vision do you see yourself in terms of the three things you talked about: the soil, the food, and the people? How are you going to combine those three?
Well, first of all, I think that everything is linked, and much more closely than we used to think about it, because you cannot grow good food if you do not have good soil, and you cannot be healthy if you do not eat good food. So it starts with the soil, and that is why it is important to know, for those of us who can, to know the farms that your food comes from, or the gardens that your vegetables come from, because they will have more or less nutrient. Chemical fertilizers and chemical inputs, which is fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, can increase the level of crops, the yield, quite a bit. However, it is like giving steroids to plants. It is all fluff, and it has very few really good nutrients. On the other hand, when you have soil that is made of organic matter that has been broken down by trillions and trillions and trillions of bacteria, then the plants, the roots, have access to a much greater range of nutrients that they absorb. And when you eat tomatoes or carrots or eggplants that come from a rich organic soil, those vegetables will transmit those nutrients to your organs. And at the same time, the same thing that happens in the soil, in the garden, or in a field, happens in our stomach, where we have trillions of bacteria that will take the pieces of vegetables and meat and grains that we eat and break them down so that to a point where the nutrients are broken down to their simplest expression, and the intestines allow the nutrients to be transferred to the blood, that then irrigates and feed our organs. But when we eat, we do not feed ourselves, we feed the bacteria that feed us. And there is a direct correlation and communication between our gut bacteria and our brain. And that is done through the vagus nerve that communicate constantly and regulates send signals. And this is why when depending on what you eat and what the bacteria that inhabit your gut have an influence not only on your physical health, but also on your mental health. And I think that's something, Pat, that you can relate to.
Well, listen, this has been very interesting. I have a couple of questions. I'm thinking of the average person going into Publix or wherever, and they've got to buy this food. They're going to shop for the week. Now, we all can't run to farmers markets, okay? I mean, we can, but many can't. A lot of people stop and shop after work, and there is no farmers market around. They're reliant on the supermarkets to bring the proper food to their store so they can buy it for their family. Talk to this person right now about what they should be looking for. They pick up a product, and hopefully by now you're not going to buy anything with corn fructose in it, but there's other stuff. How do you get the maximum? What are you looking for when you pick up that box of Kellogg's Corn Flakes or pasta or whatever the hell people buy in these stores? How do they know they're getting the nutrients that they need?
Well, the more packaging, the more graphics, the more plastic there is around it, the lesser the nutrient of the product. So the more
mass-produced, are you saying the more mass-produced?
Yes, and what happens is that those food processors are make their money by paying as little as possible on the raw material and charging the maximum to the consumer. And in between, in order to have the biggest market possible, they extend the shelf life, and by putting chemicals that will change the appearance or that will maintain the appearance, like Little Debbie cakes that can last for 25 years.
You can build your house with them.
You could build, and you have, it's basically junk food. So to answer your question, stay away from junk food, and junk food always comes with bright colors, a lot of paper, a lot of plastic, and little substance and little nutrients. So that is one extreme. The other extreme is buy things that are fresh and cook them at home. It will be cheaper because if you figure out the price of cornflakes per pound, it is more expensive than beef tenderloin.
Oh.
So, but you don't think about this by buying a box of 4 or 5 ounces of cornflakes for $4. I don't know.
I don't know, $3.59 or something. Yeah. I don't eat them, but I do look around and I try to pay attention to stuff. And I'm gonna take a pause right now because I want Pat and Emmanuel to chat a minute, and we'll set that up, and we'll be right back.
I just would like to add a quick thing. Whenever possible, buy organic and buy non-GMO products.
Okay. No GMO products, no high fructose corn syrup, and organic when you can.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
And fresh.
And fresh. Mm-hmm. So, okay, here's Pat and Emmanuel, and they're going to have a brief chat, and I'll be back to close the show.
Emmanuel, can I ask you a question about, you were talking about the soil and the depletion of the nutrients in the soil. And one of the things that I have learned is that we have a depletion of one of the trace minerals, chromium, in our soil, which helps balance blood sugar in the body. And I just wanted to know if you can add anything to that.
No, that is beyond my pay grade.
Okay.
I am not a doctor.
Okay.
I am not a scientist. I'm a generalist and I understand, and I see the connections between a lot of different things.
Oh.
But I'm not a specialist in in any one of
in
them.
that.
Yeah.
I just thought because you were so familiar with the soil so much more than I am, and that was just one of the things that I know I often, suggest that people add to their diet in just the form of a supplement because they can't get it in their food.
Yeah.
And then I also wondered how you felt about food that's being shipped from South America, from, around the world, as far as that shipping process and what it does even to what we call fresh food.
Yeah. Well, the average vegetable in a supermarket, fresh vegetable, is usually 10 to 14 days old. And fresh vegetables start losing their nutritional value after 3 days. So it is within the first 3 days that they are at the peak of their nutrient content, and after that it declines. Refrigeration obviously extends that shelf life, but you're always better off for many reasons buying locally grown vegetables, and now more and more you will find more and more small farms that produce offer local produce.
Okay, I have a quick question. Fresh frozen vegetables better than in the grocery store now?
Yes, in many instances, yes.
Okay.
If you're looking for convenience, definitely vegetables will always be better. Fresh local is better than fresh from, and fresh frozen is also good. Yeah.
The best I've learned is if you just grow your own and you can go out in your backyard and pick them, right?
Indeed, and it is
Yes.
very satisfying, and often you grow too much, and then you have the pleasure of sharing it with your neighbors.
Absolutely, I like that.
And that is builds community. It's a very good feeling.
I like that. And the other thing is that I made a note of as you were speaking is so many of my clients and the people that I know say they just have no time to cook. And I really got that that's the best thing, but a lot of it is too busy. And another part of it in dealing with addiction is that need for instant gratification. Oh, my brain says and my stomach says, well, I'm hungry. I have to eat now.
I think that it is a question of discipline. Mm-hmm. And also, if you don't take the time to cook, you will have to take the time to go to the hospital.
I agree.
So it is like everything else, pay now or pay later. And when you pay later, there is always interest to pay. So investing time in cooking makes a lot of sense. I cook for my dog. My dog eats better than most people in the city. And you know what? I never have to take him to the vet.
I agree. I cook for mine too. In fact, there's a story about dog food that one of my veterinarians, who is a doctor of Chinese medicine as well, told me about the story of dog food. It happened again when we were talking about that Industrial Revolution, because dogs used to eat healthy food, the same food people ate. And during that time, there wasn't enough food for people, so they couldn't feed the scraps or anything to the dogs. So again, these entrepreneurs figured out how to make dog food out of the things that people wouldn't eat, and therefore there was no nutrients, nothing in it, and so our dogs weren't getting the nutrients that they need. I think that some of them might be doing a little bit better today, but I think there's still a lack.
And the horrible thing is that in California, and recently there were some dog food manufacturers that were using euthanized dogs and cats in the dog food.
I think I heard that too, as you said that. Yes. One of the things I'm reminded of.
We got to wind this down time-wise, and I want you both to have an opportunity to talk a little bit about, Pat, I'd like you to say something about your book. Emmanuel, if you would say something about your next project or plans. and then I'm going to have to close the show. This has been very, very interesting, but I've got to close the show. We got to stay on track. Okay?
Gotta do it. It's been a lot of fun. I'm so glad that I got to be here today with both of you. And I have written a book. It's called Good With Me. It's a simple approach to real happiness from the inside out. And what it talks about is, and teaches people to do, is how to celebrate themselves. And part of celebrating yourself is getting healthy physically, eating healthy foods and not all the sugars and things that we've been talking about today. Also, I just want to share that that our mayor here in St. Petersburg, Florida.
I think that it's time to talk about how people can reach you. Okay, so how do people reach you? If they want to buy your book, how can they buy your book?
They can go to goodwithme.com online, or they can go to Amazon or Barnes & Noble or any of the indie bookstores.
And are you comfortable giving out your email?
I am. You could reach me at patricia@goodwithme.com.
Patricia Noll.
Yes, that other one wasn't working right.
That
Thank
other
you.
one wasn't right.
Thank you for some reason.
PatriciaNoll @goodwithme.com. And she's been a wonderful guest. We may do this again at another time. But thank you so very much.
Thank you so much, Melba.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Emmanuel, you're on.
All right, well, I think that it is appropriate that I talk about my chocolate cakes because...
Talk here about your chocolate cakes, because, brother, they're fabulous.
Mother's Day is around the corner, and like anything else in life, everything in moderation, and pleasure is an integral part of life. Otherwise, we might as well jump from a bridge. So we ship our cakes all over the country, and they are also available in St. Petersburg at the Saturday morning market and online at flourfreecakes.com, flourfreecakes.com. And I am happy to talk to anybody who has a question, who wants to ship it, or who wants to come to my kitchen and pick up a cake to give to a good friend, because pleasure is to be shared.
Pleasure is to be shared. So here we are talking.
Shared. Yes.
That's what I thought. That's what I said. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, what good is pleasure if you're not sharing it,
That's
right? This has been a great show, and it's very interesting that we're talking about something that we're all involved with, and to learn a little bit about how to have your cake, pardon the pun, and eat it too, and to enjoy sugar and all the pleasures it affords you without having it send you to the hospital. So there's extremes with everything, and I think this is just another example of that. But what I learned more than that, even about extremes, is how manipulated our foods are. That it's just amazing how manipulated what we put in our mouth is, and how willing we are to put it in our mouth. We don't question anything anymore. And what we really need to do is start questioning everything, because what you put in your mouth goes to your gut. Your gut sends a signal to your brain, and, the whole conversation goes on, and guess what? You're not even aware of it. All you know is you feel certain ways. You're tired, or you're excited, or you're burned out, or, the feelings, but you start connecting your feelings to your food. I think that would make a good show too. Okay. How to connect your feelings to your food. My son said something to me about a long time ago, actually. He says, Mom, I always feel better after I have meat. I said, what do you mean? He says, well, I get that energy from the protein. And, he's making connections. We can all make connections like that. I feel crappy. Gee, what did I just eat? And give yourself, 30 minutes? Let it work its way into your system. But make those connections between your feeling state, your emotional state, your psychological state, and, what you put in your mouth. So that's my rant. I always like to leave a few rants.
We are what we eat.
We are what we eat. And the old saws are the best. I want to thank Joe And over at UPS, 2nd and 2nd South, I'm very, very happy they're willing to sponsor this show. They've been solid and great sponsors. I'm very grateful. They have a full-service UPS store, and they are now open on Sundays. So if you have a mission and a shipment or something you need to do that requires UPS services, you know where to go in St. Pete. Or get in your car and you can go drive in from wherever else you are. So thank you, Joe. Thank you, UPS. Thank you, Pat, for being a wonderful guest. In your book, it's just a wonderful book, and I think people should read it and take your message and your vision of how we can improve our life that way. Emmanuel, I wish every mother got one of your chocolate cakes. And now you didn't mention this, but we're going to bring Joe at UPS and Emmanuel together because you didn't mention they can be shipped.
We ship them anywhere from Afghanistan to Hawaii and anywhere in between. And they are gluten-free. I forgot to mention that.
Yes,
too.
well, I'm doing that for you right now. They're gluten-free. They can be shipped anywhere without fear. I've had them for many years. They're fabulous. And they have no contaminants, no preservatives. And guess what? They have a hell of a shelf life. So because they're pure. So thank you. Thank you, Emmanuel. And look forward to similar conversations in the future. But it's time to go. We're going to say goodbye. Thank you, everyone, for listening. I really appreciate it.
Let's talk about life. Let's have a little conversation. Let's talk about life. Little love, little information. Let's talk about life. Let's talk about love.